Hello everyone, welcome back to Marcelliano MMA. In the last video, we broke down the early prelims for UFC 329 Holloway Vs Mcgregor. Now in today's video, we are going to be breaking down the prelims. The fights this consists of are Luke Riley vs Kamaka III, Cody Garbrandt vs Adrian Yanez, Gable Stevenson vs Ellinson, and Nikita Krylov vs Robert Whittaker. And we're going to start with Luke Riley vs Kamaka III. Another really interesting featherweight matchup between an undefeated prospect and a proven veteran. Riley is going to be the younger, more explosive fighter. He's still building momentum in the UFC, while Kamaka is the experienced veteran who's been in there with high-level competition, and he knows how to make fights competitive. I think this fight comes down to whether Riley can continue fighting at his pace, or if Kamaka can use his experience to slow him down and make this a much closer fight than people expect. Looking at Luke Riley, he's 5'9" with a 69-inch reach and comes into this fight with a perfect 13-0 record. He's won both of his UFC fights so far, including a second-round finish over Garbrandt and a decision win over Michael Aswell Jr. Riley has quickly become one of the more exciting prospects at featherweight because of his combination of power, pressure, and confidence. On the feet, Riley is aggressive and he likes to fight behind his boxing. He'll throw sharp combinations, he has real power, and he does a good job putting opponents on the back foot. Once he starts building momentum, he's constantly moving forward and making his opponents react instead of letting them get comfortable. One thing I like about Riley is he's always looking to build off his offense. He doesn't just throw one or two shots and resets. If he hurts someone, he'll keep the pressure on and look for the finish. At the same time though, he stays composed and he doesn't completely abandon his technique chasing a knockout. Wrestling wise, we haven't seen Riley tested consistently against high level offensive wrestling, but he's shown enough that I'm not overly concerned. Most of his success comes from keeping the fight standing, where he can pressure opponents and land the cleaner shots. He also does train with people like Paddy Pimblett, which, it gives me some confidence for his jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. The biggest concern I do have with Riley is his defensive responsibility. Because he likes moving forward and throwing combinations, he can leave openings to be hit himself. Against someone like Kamaka, who's durable and willing to exchange, that could become a factor if Riley gets a little bit too comfortable. Now looking at Kamaka III, he's 5'7" with a 69-inch reach and comes into this fight with an 18-7-1 record. He's a veteran who's fought in multiple major promotions and recently returned to the UFC. Kamaka has always been known as a tough, durable fighter who's willing to fight anyone and usually make fights competitive. On the feet, Kamaka is a high-volume boxer who likes to stay busy throughout the fight. He throws a lot of combinations, he'll keep a solid pace, and he isn't afraid to stand in the pocket and trade. He doesn't have the same one-shot finishing ability as Riley, but he makes up for it with activity and toughness. Wrestling-wise, Kamaka will mix in takedowns when they're available, but he's not the type of fighter who's going to completely change the fight with his wrestling. His biggest strength is making fights competitive everywhere and forcing opponents to work for every minute. The biggest question I have for Kamaka is whether he can deal with Riley's speed and power. Riley is younger, fresher, and probably the more explosive athlete. If Kamaka spends too much time exchanging in the pocket, I think Riley is eventually going to find the cleaner shots. The biggest question in this fight is whether Kamaka's experience can slow Riley down, or if Riley is simply the better fighter at this stage of their careers. Kamaka is the type of veteran who doesn't make many mistakes, but Riley has looked like a legitimate prospect every time he stepped in the octagon. And personally, I think Riley gets it done. I expect Kamaka to make this competitive because he's durable and experienced, but I think Riley will be faster, more powerful, and more damaging striker throughout the fight. Kamaka, I'm sure he will have moments, but I think Riley wins the majority of the exchanges and continues his rise in this division. I have Luke Riley winning this fight around 65% of the time, and I think the most likely outcome is a decision. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Riley found a late finish if Kamaka starts slowing down. Now going on to Cody Garbrandt versus Adrian Yanez, another really fun bantamweight matchup between two guys who are going to want to keep this fight standing. Garbrandt is the faster, more explosive fighter with elite hand speed and legitimate knockout power even at this stage in his career, while Yanez is the more technical boxer who likes to stay composed, work behind his fundamentals, and slowly break opponents down. I think this fight comes down to whether Garbrandt can use his speed and explosiveness to land first, or if Yanez can drag him into a technical boxing match where he starts taking over as the fight goes on. Looking at Cody Garbrandt, he's 5'8" gate with a 65.5-inch reach, and he comes in this fight with a 14-7 record. He's a former UFC bantamweight champion and one of those fast boxers the division has seen in recent history. Even though he has his ups and downs over the years, there's still no denying how dangerous he is whenever he lets his hands go. On the feet, Garbrandt is at his best when he's fighting with confidence. He's explosive, he'll have incredible hand speed, and he does a great job slipping shots before firing back with heavy counters. When he's using his footwork and not loading up on every punch, he's one of the hardest hitting fighters in this division. Wrestling-wise, Garbrandt has a strong wrestling background, but it's not something he relies on very often. He'll mix in occasional takedown if it's there, but the majority of his success comes from his boxing. I wouldn't expect him to wrestle much unless he feels like the striking isn't going his way. The biggest concern with Garbrandt has always been his defense once the fight turns into a brawl. Sometimes he'll abandon his movement, he'll start looking for one big shot, and leave himself open in exchanges. One thing I will say though is that over the last few fights, he's looked much more disciplined than he did a few years ago. He's been more willing to stick to a game plan instead of chasing knockouts, and that's helped him become a more consistent fighter. The question is whether that style will be enough against someone like Yanez. Now looking at Yanez, he's 5'7" with a 70-inch reach, giving him a massive 4.5-inch reach advantage in this matchup. He comes in this fight with a 19-6 record, and has built a reputation as one of the cleaner boxers in the bantamweight division. On the feet, Yanez is extremely technical. He has excellent boxing, he throws clean combinations, and he does a great job staying patient. He isn't someone who's going to rush looking for a finish. Instead, he'll stay behind his jab, work the body, and slowly build momentum as the fight goes on. One thing I really like about Yanez is how calm he stays. Even when his opponents pressure him, he rarely panics. He'll trust his technique, he'll keep his hands active, and usually lands the cleaner shots over the course of the fight. His volume is one of his biggest strengths. In over 15 minutes, he has a way of slowly taking rounds away from his opponents. Wrestling-wise, Yanez has improved his takedown defense throughout his UFC career, but just like Garbrandt, that's not where he wants to fight. He's going to want a kickboxing match where he can use his boxing momentum and reach his advantage. The biggest question for Yanez is how he'll deal with Garbrandt's speed early. Cody is usually his most dangerous in the opening round. If Yanez gets caught exchanging too much early, this fight could end quickly. One thing I think is going to be huge in this matchup is the reach. Yanez is going to have a 4.5-inch reach advantage, and against someone like Garbrandt, who's at his best slipping in shots and countering, that's a massive factor. If Yanez can establish jab and keep Cody at the end of his punches, Garbrandt is going to have to work much harder just to get into his range. Every time Cody tries to explode in a pocket, Yanez is going to have opportunities to intercept him with straight shots before the exchanges even begin. The biggest question in this fight overall is whether Garbrandt can fight with discipline for all 3 rounds. If he sticks to his movement, he'll use his speed and picks his shots. He absolutely has the tools to make this competitive, but if this fight turns into a firefight, to say, I actually think that favors Yanez because he's the more technically sound boxer. He has the reach advantage and has shown better composure and prolonged exchanges. I think Yanez gets it done. I don't think this is a fight where Garbrandt gets blown out. I actually think he'll have some success early because of his speed and explosiveness, but over 15 minutes, I trust Yanez's volume, reach, and technical boxing more. I think he'll start slowly taking over the striking exchanges, forcing Garbrandt to work harder to close the distance, and winning the majority of the rounds. I think I have Yanez winning this fight around 65 to 70% of the time, and I think the most likely outcome is a decision. Garbrandt always has the power to change a fight with one shot, but if Yanez sticks to his game plan, I think he's the more complete striker over 3 rounds. Now going to Gable Stevenson versus Alicia Ellinson. This is one of the more... I'm saying all these fights are interesting. I fucking love this card, man. We still don't know a lot about Gable Stevenson in MMA, even though he is the biggest favorite in UFC history. We know that he's accomplished in wrestling, but this is his UFC debut against a heavyweight who's willing to make it ugly and force exchanges. I think this fight comes down to whether Ellinson can survive the early pressure and test Stevenson in areas we haven't seen yet, or if Stevenson proves the hype is real and puts on another dominant performance. Looking at Gable Stevenson, he's 6'1", weighs 265, and comes into this fight with a 3-0 professional MMA record. Every one of his wins has come by first round knockout or TKO, so even though his wrestling is what made him famous, he's quickly shown that he has real power in the feet as well. He's one of the more decorated wrestlers we've ever seen transition to MMA, winning Olympic gold and multiple NCAA national championships before making his move to the UFC. On the feet, Stevenson has looked much more comfortable than I expected early in this career. He's explosive, he throws with bad intentions, and he does a good job closing the distance behind his athleticism. He's still developing as a striker, but because opponents have to respect his wrestling so much, if it opens up opportunities for him to land big shots. Wrestling wise, this is where Stevenson has the biggest advantage you'll ever see in a UFC debut. His takedowns are explosive, his control is elite, and once he gets on top, it's incredibly difficult to create space. The biggest thing that stands out is how easily he can dictate where the fight takes place. If he wants to fight standing, it would probably stay standing. If he wants to wrestle, he'll probably get the takedown. The only real concern is that we haven't seen him get pushed. He hasn't been forced into deep waters, and he hasn't fought out of bad positions, and he hasn't had to deal with adversity inside the cage. That's not necessarily a weakness, it's just something we haven't seen yet. Looking at Ellinson, he'll come into this fight with a 5-2 record. He's an aggressive heavyweight who likes to pressure forward and look for finishes. One thing that stands out is that none of his professional fights have gone the distance. Whether he wins or loses, his fights usually end early. On the feet, Ellinson throws with a lot of power and isn't afraid to exchange. He's going to have to make this fight chaotic because if he allows Stevenson to dictate the pace, it isn't going to be a very long night. His best chance is making Stevenson uncomfortable early and forcing him into a fight instead of a wrestling match. Wrestling wise, this is obviously where the biggest concern comes in. Going against someone with Stevenson's credentials is about as difficult as it gets. Even if Ellinson has solid wrestling himself, there's a massive difference between defending regional level wrestlers and defending an Olympic gold medalist. The biggest question for Ellinson is whether he can keep this fight standing long enough to test Stevenson's striking and cardio. If Stevenson starts landing takedowns early, it's going to be very difficult for Ellinson to build any momentum. The biggest question in this fight is whether Stevenson's wrestling translates immediately against UFC competition. Based on everything we've seen so far, I think it does. His wrestling is so dominant that it forces opponents to constantly think about the takedown, which opens up his striking even more. That's a huge advantage, especially at a division like heavyweight, and I do think Stevenson gets it done quite confidently. I expect Ellinson to come out aggressively because that's probably his best chance of pulling off the upset, but I think Stevenson is simply too good athletically and too dominant as a wrestler. I think he'll dictate where the fight takes place from the opening minute, and once he gets on top or starts mixing his wrestling with his striking, I think the fight just ends too quickly. I have Gable Stevenson winning this fight around 90% of the time, and I think that's most likely outcome is a first round TKO, with that being a ground and pound stoppage. The betting market is extremely confident in Stevenson as well, and I think it's justified given this stylistic matchup. And we've seen both fighters, and what we've seen from both of them leading into UFC 329. Now for the final prelim matchup, if you're still watching, thank you guys. If you're just tuning in for this matchup specifically, it's Nikita Krylov versus Robert Whittaker. This is a fight I've been bouncing back and forth on, I'll be honest. At first I was on Krylov, then I was on Whittaker, then I was back on Krylov, then I was on Whittaker. Right now I am on Whittaker. He's of course going to be small. Like, to simplify, he's going to be small at light heavyweight, but Krylov's shin is just gone. By breakdown, we can just say right now, this is a really interesting light heavyweight matchup because it's a clash between a dangerous, aggressive finisher and one of the most technically skilled fighters in MMA. Krylov is the bigger, more physical fighter who wants to make this fight chaotic with pressure, power, and grappling, while Whittaker is the more technical striker who wants to control distance, use his movement, and win a clean fight at range. I think this fight comes down to whether Krylov can force Whittaker into uncomfortable exchanges, or if Whittaker can keep the fight at his pace for 15 minutes. So looking at Nikita Krylov, he's 6'3" with a 77-inch reach, and he comes in this fight with a 31-11 record. He's been competing at light heavyweight for years and has always been one of the most dangerous fighters in this division because he has multiple ways to win. Whether it's striking, wrestling, or submissions, Krylov is always looking for the finish. On the feet, Krylov is extremely aggressive. He throws with power, he mixes in his kicks well, and is willing to take risks to create openings. He's not the cleanest technical striker in the division, but his pressure and unpredictability does make him dangerous. He can hurt opponents quickly because he doesn't give them much time to let them settle them into their rhythm. Wrestling wise, this is where Krylov has the biggest advantage in my opinion. He is willing to mix in takedowns, use the clinch, and attack submissions when opponents' opportunities appear. Against a lot of fighters, that combination of size and grappling makes him difficult to deal with. The biggest concern with Krylov is consistency. He's always been dangerous, but he can also become too aggressive and leave openings defensively. Against someone like Whittaker, who's one of the best counter strikers in the whole sport, mistakes are going to be punished. Looking at Robert Whittaker, he's 6 foot exact with a 73-inch reach and comes in this fight as one of the more experienced fighters in the UFC. He's a former middleweight champion and has spent his career fighting with the absolute best competition in the world. On the feet, Whittaker has the clear technical advantage. His footwork, timing, and ability to manage distance are some of I'm recording the visuals for this right now. Are these mixed up? Because it says Robert Whittaker right here, but this is very clearly Robert Whittaker, and this is Nikita Krylov right here, and this is very clearly Nikita Krylov, and these are Robert Whittakers, and these are Nikita Krylovs, and this is Robert Whittaker, this is Nikita Krylov. So yeah, the names are just mixed up. So yeah, I'll let the audio go back, but yeah, that was confusing me a bit. Turning and exiting range, landing combinations, and avoiding unnecessary damage. Even though moving up to light heavyweight, I still think his speed is going to be one of his biggest weapons. Wrestling wise, Whittaker's takedown defense is one of the biggest factors in this fight. He's very difficult to take down and even harder to keep there. Krylov's best path is making this a physical fight, but Whittaker has shown throughout his career that he can survive against elite grapplers. One thing I think is important in this matchup is Whittaker moving up to 205. The biggest question was always how his body would handle the weight cut at middleweight. At light heavyweight, he won't have to drain himself nearly as much, which could help his cardio durability and overall performance late in fights. The biggest question in this fight is whether Krylov can turn this into his type of fight. If he can pressure Whittaker, force him against the cage, and make him deal with his size and grappling, I think he has a real chance. But if Whittaker keeps this fight open in space, I think Krylov is going to struggle consistently, like trying to land clean offense. I think Whittaker does get it done. I think Krylov will have moments because he's too dangerous and too experienced to completely overlook. But over 15 minutes, I trust Whittaker's technique, movement, and ability to avoid damage more. I think he stuffs enough takedowns, avoids the big shots, and wins the majority of the striking exchanges. I have Whittaker winning this fight about 65% of the time, and I think the most likely outcome is a decision. Krylov's best chance is catching Whittaker in a chaotic exchange or forcing a grappling heavy fight, but if Whittaker fights his fight, I think he just has too many advantages. And that's going to be it for wrapping up the early prelims for UFC 329. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you disagree or agree, please leave a comment. I'll be checking those out. I still will be posting the main card, and then I'll be doing a whole event overview. So yeah, that's going to be it. If you enjoyed this video, have a great day, have a great night wherever you're coming from. I'll see you guys later, hopefully. Goodbye.